From the dark waters of Lake Superior to the soaring pines of Voyageur National Park, Minnesota looks peaceful by day, majestic even. But this land is ancient, far older than the mansions, lighthouses, or towns along the shore. For more than 12,000 years, human beings have roamed these hills, and every generation leaves a mark. Some are written in history books, and others linger in the very rocks and water themselves. So join us as we tour the carpeted halls of a 100-year-old haunted estate, boat through waters said to be guarded by an evil spirit, and go inside a Civil War fort where the dead still linger. These are the legends that still echo across the North Shore, even under a blue Minnesota sky. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, and that's never been more so than in the case of the murdered heiress. Here on the banks of Lake Superior on the north side of Duluth sits one of the best preserved Gilded Age manors in the country, Glensheen. This massive estate covers 12 acres with a mansion that boasts 39 rooms spread out over 4 floors and 20,000 square feet.
This mansion was built in 1905 by iron magnate Chester Congdon. He lived here with his wife and 7 children for many happy years, and it is an enduring icon of this landscape. But did you also know that this historic home is also the site of one of Minnesota's most grisly murders, as well as one of its most enduring hauntings?
The Congdons were one of Minnesota's most influential families, philanthropists, civic leaders, and early builders of Duluth. Chester Congdon served as the state's district attorney before earning the bulk of his fortune from the famed Mesabi Iron Range. For a full deep dive into the Congdon family and their legacy in Minnesota, watch my video exploring the secrets of Glensheen. Today, it's preserved by the University of Minnesota. But for nearly a century, this was a family home. Each of the children's rooms are well preserved, complete with their furniture and loved toys. Clara, the matriarch of the family, passed away here at the age of 96. By then, she'd outlived 3 of her children and 4 were married with homes and families of their own.
Elizabeth Congdon was born April 22, 1894, and was the 7th out of 8 children born to the Congdons. She was the one to inherit the house upon her mother's death in 1950, and she lived the rest of her years here. Elizabeth chose never to marry, and in her 30s, she adopted 2 baby girls. The first she named Marjorie, and the second Jennifer.
By all accounts, their time together was happy. Elizabeth's daughters each built lives of their own.
Marjorie was married 3 times. I could not find the name of her first husband anywhere in any news articles, but I do know that she had 7 children with him. Her second husband was Roger Caldwell.
Jennifer also married and even held the ceremony on the grounds of Glensheen. The university honors their relationship with a display in the dining room that includes the family silver, a gift to Jennifer from Elizabeth on her wedding day. Elizabeth continued to live at Glensheen, needing increasing care as she aged.
Elizabeth had a stroke in 1965 that left her paralyzed on one side and in need of round-the-clock care.
This was accomplished by a staff of nurses who traded shifts so that Ms. Congdon was never alone in the home. One of her preferred companions was Velma Piatila, who remained at Glensheen until she retired from nursing. Even after retirement, Velma continued to visit and would stay overnight when another nurse needed a shift covered. And it was on one of these overnight visits in June of 1977 that misfortune settled over this beautiful estate.
On the morning of June 27th, the mansion was unusually quiet. The day nurse let herself in and unfortunately found tragedy waiting for her inside. On the grand staircase first was the body of Velma Piatila. She had been bludgeoned to death with a nearby candlestick, left at the scene of the crime. As the day nurse moved on to check on Ms. Congdon, she sadly found the 83-year-old heiress suffocated to death in her bed with a satin pillow. A jewelry box was missing from the room, as was Mrs. Piatila's car from the parking lot. At first, investigators thought the motive had been robbery, and that was the assumption on which they moved forward.
The master bedroom, where Elizabeth was found, had been tossed. Papers were strewn on the floor. Despite the mess, however, only the jewelry box was found to be missing. The house itself was filled with valuables, yet none of these had been touched. And that's when detectives began to question whether robbery had ever been the motive at all.
It was rather quickly, however, that their attentions began to turn towards Marjorie and her then-husband, Roger Caldwell.
You see, while things with Jennifer were happy and stable, Elizabeth and Marjorie's relationship had deteriorated. Marjorie had always enjoyed the money and comfortable life she'd grown up with, and even after she married and moved out of Glensheen, she continued to maintain a luxury shopping habit.
Marjorie had been given her own trust fund, which she managed to spend through quite quickly and was known to frequently ask her mother for more money.
It's important to note that prior to Elizabeth's stroke in 1965, she and her remaining siblings had already decided that Glensheen would become a historic preserve managed by the University of Minnesota after her death. I want you to know that so it's clear that the house and land were never a motive for murder. There was, however, a sizable fortune still owned by the Congdons. We are talking millions and millions of dollars.
After Elizabeth's medical event, her estate was put into trust and managed by trustees, and one of the first things they did was cut Marjorie off from accessing her mother's funds.
Reportedly, this frustrated Marjorie. By then, she was divorced from her first husband and determined to gain access to the estate.
Marjorie married Roger in 1976, only 1 year before her mother's death, and they quite quickly became investigators' prime suspects. Attention shifted to Marjorie and Roger when investigators learned that 3 days before Elizabeth's death, Marjorie authorized a document that said, upon Elizabeth's death, when she received $8 million of inheritance, Roger would be receiving $2.5 million of that inheritance. This looked very suspicious and timely to investigators. One key piece of evidence during Roger's trial was an envelope found in Elizabeth's bedroom that had his fingerprint on it.
Prosecutors felt they had what they needed. In their view, the motive was money. They believed Marjorie had manipulated Roger into committing the crimes with the promise of a share of her inheritance. And with the envelope found among the papers scattered across the master bedroom, they felt they could physically tie him to the scene of the crime.
Roger was convicted of the killings both of Piatiela and Elizabeth Congdon in 1978 and given 2 life sentences.
Marjorie, however, was acquitted. The envelope with the fingerprint was thrown out after expert testimony challenged its reliability, and her acquittal led to a plea deal for Roger. He was released following her trial for time served.
In all, he only served 5 years of 2 life sentences for murders he admitted to committing.
But Glensheen's darker history stretches back even further, long before the Congdons ever lived here.
It might surprise you to learn that the murders of Elizabeth Congdon and Velma Piatila were not the first to occur at Glensheen, or at least not the first to occur on the land. Before the Congdons, there were the Tishers, a family from Switzerland who began a logging operation at what is now known as Tisher Creek. In 1880, the county of St. Louis, which covers what is today Duluth, began raising municipal funds by issuing beer garden licenses. The Tishers decided to obtain one of these licenses, and on June 27th, and yes, you heard that date correctly, they decided to host their very first public beer garden event. They opened up their farm and invited local people on what is now known as Glensheen Mansion Estate. As the day wore on and guests became more and more inebriated, predictably, a fight broke out. The fight was between James Brennan, a local railroad official, and another unknown man. As the fight began to escalate, it's written that Brennan's brother rushed forward to help and intervene. That's when the son of Herman Opel, a local grocer magnate, rushed into the fray. He used his walking cane to hit Brennan's brother over the head. Now, normally this wouldn't be a life-threatening injury unless the walking cane you have has a completed lead-carved head. He hit Brennan's brother so hard that the man died in under 3 minutes, right here. The killing occurred 97 years to the day before the death of Elizabeth Congdon. And similarly, the killer was acquitted. Opel never served any time in prison.
And with so much history layered on this land, it's no surprise that many visitors have experiences they can't quite explain.
In Glensheen, many people have reported seeing shadow figures move throughout the hallways. Forms, faces, shapes are often seen in the windows looking out over Lake Superior or looking out over the gardens. This will be at times where the house is known to be empty, where people have shut up the house, they're leaving for the day, and as they look back, they see someone watching them from one of the windows. Many people have reported feeling a cold spot on the grand staircase where Velma Piatiella's body was found. In the master bedroom where Elizabeth was found, many people report experience extreme sadness. Some even leave, they're so overcome by it. But the overall feeling in the household is one of happiness and joy. Most people report feeling unexplained joy when they're in this home. It is very clearly a loved family home where happy memories were made, and that's how they wish to remember it. Tour guides are not going to tell you about the murder. Even though there is a book in the gift shop and they may discuss it a little bit, it's not something they generally like to talk about. Several members of the Congdon family sit on the board that manages the estate, and they'd prefer to remember the good times had here at Glensheen, and there were many good times. I can say the overall mood in the house is cheerful. You can tell it's a very special place. The one ghost most frequently seen is Elizabeth's, but it's not where you would think. Elizabeth is often seen in the library. It was her favorite room where she enjoyed spending the most time. She could sit amongst her favorite books where her father made annotations about what he thought about them. Beneath the painting her mother did while she was in college. That was her special place, and I like to think Elizabeth is here remembering the good times, keeping her family's warm, happy history alive. Next time you're in Duluth, be sure to come check out Glensheen, walk the grounds, take the mansion tour, remember the Congdons. But also remember, there are ghosts still alive here. And now I'd like to tell you a little ghost story about the often cited, infamous ghost ship of Lake Superior, the SS Bannockburn. I'm standing on the shores of Lake Superior now, and honestly, this is the perfect conditions in which to see the Bannockburn. The Bannockburn is a 245-foot-long steamer built in England and transported to the Midwest to carry grain back and forth across Lake Superior. Duluth to Ontario was its most common shipping route. The crew of the Bannockburn were mostly young men, around 20 sailors, all under the age of 22, save the captain. The SS Bannockburn set sail on November 21st, 1902, with 85,000 tons of Manitoba wheat on a heading for Ontario. The Bannockburn is a single-screw steel bulk freight steamer. This is important because it describes the outline and type of ship that can be seen through the fog. The Bannockburn was even more unique in that her pilot house was set back and the cabins were set forward. It makes the outline of the ship unique. An intense snowstorm set in over the lake the evening of November 21st. It was quite late in the season for the Bannockburn to be making runs, but it was by and far not the only ship out on the lake that night. After the Bannockburn left harbor, sadly, she was never seen again. Once the shipping officers in Ontario realized the Bannockburn had not only not arrived, but had severely missed her arrival point, search and rescue crews were sent out. No distress signals were ever received. By early December, the ship had been declared officially lost. On December 12th, 2 items washed up on shore of note. One was an oar inscribed with the Bannockburn's name, and the other, a life jacket. The life jacket is significant because it was fastened as though it had held someone. It wasn't open like it had washed off deck. It was secured, and the straps of the life jacket were covered in blood. The name Bannockburn could still be made out on the life jacket. The sailor's age and lack of experience has often been cited as a reason why the Bannockburn may have foundered or run into some difficulty on the lake. The Bannockburn is often referred to as the Flying Dutchman of Lake Superior, based on the number of times it's been sighted. This ship is rumored to be doomed to forever sail Lake Superior, attempting to deliver her cargo. Sightings of the ghost ship began as early as 1903 and continue still today. In 1942, a fishing boat reported nearly colliding with a steamer out on the lake. And as the ship bore down on them and their collision was impending, the steamer vanished without a trace. The ship is most often seen by other sailors out on Lake Superior on foggy days, just like this one. When the ship is seen, her outline appears through the haze. She'll sail along until she simply disappears. Some even report seeing lights in the night that match the outline and location of lights on the deck of the Bannockburn. Ships that have gotten close enough to the Bannockburn to see the hull, to see the deck, have reported skeletons on board the ship. I am not making this up. Many of the sailors who reported seeing skeletons on the deck of the Bannockburn did so knowing it would endanger their standing and reputation within the sailing community here on Lake Superior, but they made the reports anyways. This is why the style of ship is so important. The men who sail on Lake Superior, this is their career. They sell well-known shipping lanes. They know most of the other freighters because they see them so frequently. And at this point, over 100 years after the loss of the Bannockburn, that style, that outline, they're very outdated. They're not something you're going to find or see anymore. It's how they know they're seeing something out of time, out of history. One ship did pass near the Bannockburn that fateful night, the SS Algonquin. They spotted it, and I'm going to read it to you, and if you're a local, please forgive my mispronunciation. They spotted the Bannockburn 80 miles off Keweenaw Point. The Bannockburn appeared fine. There were no distress signals, no one was calling out to them, everything seemed normal. On the deck of the Algonquin stood Captain McMaw. When he saw the Bannockburn, he stopped, he watched her, but then briefly something on deck called his attention away. He looked down and back up, and in that length of time, the Bannockburn had disappeared. Another ship, a passenger steamer, the SS Huron, also believes they spotted the Bannockburn that night. However, if they did, the Bannockburn at that point was significantly off course from her original shipping route. Men on deck reported seeing lights in the shape of the hull outline of the Bannockburn, but their sightings have been questioned They speculate. No one is really certain what they saw that night. Again, an intense storm was setting in. And because this was a passenger steamer, everyone had been ordered inside. Nobody was really remaining out on deck for very long at that time, just the crew. Another ship that arrived to Ontario later that week reported sailing through a debris field off of Stannard Rock. However, there's no evidence that was the Bannockburn either. There was no logos, no inscriptions, no ship name in the debris, simply a debris field. And of course, anytime that area has been searched, they haven't found the wreckage underwater either. One common theory as to what happened to the Bannockburn is that she struck what's known as Superior Shoal. Now, Lake Superior is massive and deep, in many places exceeding 1,000 feet in depth. However, out in the middle of the lake is an underwater mountain. This was not charted until the 1920s. In some areas, the mountain rises as high as simply 21 feet below the surface of the water. It is so large, it has its own mountaintops, its own valleys, its own ridges. But in 1902, nobody was really sure what was out there. They simply did not have the technology to do that kind of underwater mapping. So there are some theories that the Bannockburn scraped her hull on Superior Shoal, took on water, and sank before they could even call out for help. Another strange aspect of this case that leads to it being called the Flying Dutchman of Lake Superior is that no significant wreckage ever washed ashore. Now, Lake Superior is not without its other ghost ships and is considered by many to be quite the graveyard, but that wreckage is known. The site of those sinkings is known. Bannockburn has never been found. No bodies ever washed ashore either. The only thing, again, that they ever found was that single oar and that single life vest. Next time you're in Duluth, take a moment and stop on the shore of Lake Superior. Look out over the water, peer into the distance, and see if you can locate the elusive ghost ship, Bannockburn. I'd like to bring you now to the rugged forests and boundary waters of Voyageur National Park, on the border between America and Canada and the northernmost part of Minnesota. And I'd like to tell you the legend of the Wendigo. This legend is Native American in origin. It comes from the Algonquin-speaking people. Now, Algonquin is also a tribe, but when we refer to it here, it is the common language shared by the Algonquin, the Cree, the Ojibwe, and the Innu, who lived in these very forests. I'm sitting on one of the islands out in this national park that is only reachable by boat, and I'm telling you that so that you can picture how sparsely populated this area is. Myself and my family are quite literally the only people in these woods today. This is the least populated area of Minnesota, and I think that plays a hand in this myth. The Wendigo typically appears during times of scarcity and famine, and it feeds off the flesh of human beings. As you can imagine, this creature is often associated with winter, when scarcity is at its worst. The first recorded instance of the Wendigo dates back to 1636, when a Jesuit missionary to Quebec wrote of an Algonquin woman coming into camp screaming that a Wendigo was out hitting their camps and had already eaten several tribal members. The Wendigo appears emaciated. Its skin is ashen, and it has antlers, as well as a heart made of ice. The more human beings it eats, the taller it becomes, so that its hunger can never be satisfied. It has glowing eyes and long claws, and the smell of decay and rot radiates from it. Many people say they can smell the Wendigo before they see it. The Wendigo's face is lipless because it has eaten them, and long fangs protrude from its mouth. Wendigos again appear in recorded history in 1879 and 1909 as a defense for murder. It's important for you to know here that sometimes the legend states that a human being can become possessed by the spirit of Wendigo. Others say that when a human being eats another person and commits cannibalism, then they begin to transform into the Wendigo. Now, in the case of 1879, sadly, a Canadian trapper killed and consumed his entire family, but then later said in court that he had been possessed by the spirit of Wendigo and could not be held accountable for his actions. And rest assured, the Canadian courts did not see it that way, and he was tried and executed for his crimes. Later, in 1909, two brothers murdered a young woman and then later claimed she had already been possessed by the spirit of Wendigo and that they were simply protecting everyone else from what she might have done. Again, the courts did not accept this explanation and they were convicted for their crime. This legend gave rise to the clinical term Wendigo psychosis, which was used to describe anyone who had turned to cannibalism. In 1910, the Wendigo legend was officially set to paper in the fictional tale The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood. This story details a group of hunters in the woods. One goes off into the trees and does not return. The other leaves to go look for him and hears the first hunter calling to him. He tries to find him in the darkness, in the snow. He keeps following his voice, and his friends later find him starved and half dead in the cold. The Wendigo had been mimicking the voice of the first hunter, whom it had killed and eaten. From that point forward, the Wendigo legend began to be associated with the creature mimicking the voices of friends and loved ones of its victims, calling them deeper into the woods where it can attack them. In 1893, the story of the Wendigo was set to paper by none other than Theodore Roosevelt in his book, The Wilderness Hunter. Roosevelt writes of meeting a trapper named Bauman. Bauman told Roosevelt of a time he had been camping and trapping with several other hunters near the Canadian border. One night, their campsite was trashed, and when they attempted to find out what sort of creature had ransacked their equipment, the tracks that led off into the night were human-like, but not quite. They prepared themselves, and the creature came back later that same evening. It smelled, he said, of death and decay, and they shot at it repeatedly until it ran off into the night again. Bauman and the others resumed their work and didn't think much of it, but later in the week, Bauman had to leave camp to check on several of his traps. He was gone for a period of a few days, and when he returned, he found their base camp not only destroyed again, but one of his fellow hunters dead and a little chewed on. Roosevelt, in The Wilderness Hunter, refers to this creature as a goblin monster. Others have thought he could have been referring to a Bigfoot-like creature, but more historians think this could be a reference to the Wendigo and the Wendigo legend. Bauman explained to Roosevelt that he and the other hunters, in fact, knew the woods there had a bad reputation. Some years before, a fellow trapper had been discovered murdered and cannibalized right in those very woods. Now, in order to kill a Wendigo, you must use silver or iron. The creature's heart of ice must be cut out and then burned, and this ritual must be performed by a shaman, or else the Wendigo will return. Next time you find yourself in northern Minnesota, make sure you're home before dark. If you hear your loved ones or friends calling to you from the trees, think twice before you go after them. And maybe, just maybe, keep a knife made of silver or iron handy nearby, in case Wendigo stalks near. Our final stop on this ghostly tour of the North Star Estate brings us here to haunted Fort Snelling, just south of downtown Minneapolis. I know it's a bit of a tired, old trope to start a spooky story by saying that something was built on ancient, sacred Native American land, but in the case of Fort Snelling, it just so happens to be true. Built in 1819, this stone structure took 6 years to complete. Its purpose? To gain a controlling hand in the fur trade booming along the U.S.-Canadian border, as well as to keep an eye on the British, with whom an international boundary line had just been somewhat recently established in international waters. Fort Snelling was built at the junction where the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers meet. This place where we're standing is known to the Dakota people as Bodote, the heart of creation for their people. It was in this very place that the Creator took clay from between these two rivers and formed the very first Dakota. The spirits of those Dakota traveled down Chanku-Wanaji, the spirit road from the stars. Their people lived at and around Bodote for thousands of years. We've now climbed to the top of the watchtower inside Fort Snelling, where I want to tell you about the dispute between the U.S. Army and the Dakota people. This land sadly was taken from them in 1805. Zebulon Pike, an Army officer, met with several of the Dakota Nation leaders to discuss purchasing this land. Now, 7 leaders were needed to get the full approval of the Dakota people, and Pike only managed to persuade 2. Regardless, he drew up a treaty, which those 2 members then signed, agreeing to sell this land to the Army for $200,000. Again, remember, Zebulon Pike had no authority to be making or signing treaties on behalf of the U.S. government. The treaty then made its way to the U.S. Senate, who decided to move forward with the purchase of the land, even though they did not have the necessary agreements from the other Dakota leaders. But they did make one important ratification. Instead of purchasing the land for $200,000, they adjusted the amount down to $2,000. The Dakota were forcibly removed from their own land. This event became a turning point in leading to what would become the U.S.-Dakota War of 1862. The Dakota lost that war, and they were imprisoned right here at Fort Snelling on their own land. If you look down here behind me, there are beautiful wildflowers growing here now, but this would have been the site of concentration camps. Disease ran rampant through the camps. The Dakota were interred here from 1862 through the winter to 1863. And if you know anything about Minnesota, it is that it is known for harsh winters. They were not given adequate supplies nor good enough care to survive that winter. And it is said that every morning, the people in the camps never knew who would be alive or who would be dead. Slavery was also common here at Fort Snelling. Even though the fort itself was located inside of a free territory and even served as recruitment grounds for the Union Army, officers were allowed to keep enslaved individuals. There was a separate stipulation for it in the Missouri Compromise. And those officers who did choose to keep enslaved individuals even received an extra stipend on top of their salary. This even included Josiah Snelling, who oversaw construction of the fort and for whom the fort is still currently named. Many enslaved individuals died here due to the poor conditions in which they were kept. They weren't adequately fed, they weren't properly cared for through the winters. Sadly, their deaths were not even accurately reported, nor their burials here at the fort marked, because they were property and not people.
That's exactly the type of tragedy that tends to lead to paranormal activity. And it's no wonder Fort Snelling has become known as one of the most haunted sites in Minnesota.
Here at the fort, ghostly apparitions and shadow figures have reported being seen by staff and visitors alike. Soldiers from every war represented here at the fort have been seen at one time or another. Men stuck out of their own time, tied to the military history of this place. Footsteps without a source and disembodied voices can be heard echoing down these empty hallways. Patches of cold seem to linger around this old structure, no matter how warm the day is. Fort Snelling is a site of a lot of tragedy and a lot of sorrow, but also a lot of ingenuity and hope as well. It's no surprise that restless spirits linger here still, perhaps looking for justice or some sort of peace. Now, we're not here to ghost hunt. It's not really a term that I love, but we are here to ghost observe, shall we say, and to be respectful and remember the people whose lives were lost here, the tragedies that this land bore witness to, and the new things that were built on top of it. I'd like to end our tour through haunted Minnesota here at this ceremonial burial site, sacred to the Dakota, still preserved today. I'm sitting in Pilot Knob Burial Mound, here in a sacred circle, honoring the Dakota people and all that they lost during the early to mid-1800s as the U.S. expanded through their territories. Having visited the scenes of so much tragedy at Fort Snelling, I wanted to end in a place where death was peaceful and life was celebrated. For many thousands of years, the Dakota people brought their dead here to celebrate their lives and honor them, and make a way for them back to the stars, back to the Creator. If you visit Minnesota, I hope you'll take time to stop at its places of cultural significance. Visit Glensheen Manor and spend some time in the library with Elizabeth. Keep your eyes on the horizon over Lake Superior and see if you can make out the SS Bannock making her final delivery. Travel north to Voyageur National Park, but bring lots of supplies. And if you hear your loved ones calling to you from the trees, don't go after them. It may just be the Wendigo. And if you come down to Minneapolis, visit Fort Snelling, remember the Dakota people and the enslaved people who lost their lives there. Come here to Pilot Knob to pay your respects. And remember, we don't ghost hunt, we just ghost observe. We share a comfortable space with those who have decided to linger a little longer among us. Did that sound creepy?